Fishing nets. For thousands of years, they've been tools of survival, stretched across rivers and seas by coastal communities to harvest the living wealth of the waters. Later, they became the backbone of commercial fishing, today a $230 billion industry. But along the way, they also turned into a major environmental hazard, clogging oceans, killing marine life, and creating mountains of plastic waste. And now, in one of history's strangest twists, fishing nets have reappeared not in the water, but on the battlefield. In the muddy trenches and scorched roads of eastern Ukraine, these simple strands of nylon and rope have become an unlikely frontline defense. Not against fish, not against submarines, but against drones. Yes, you heard that right. Fishing nets, one of humanity's oldest technologies, are now being used to trap some of the most advanced weapons of modern war. It's a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem, and it's reshaping how both sides fight in Ukraine's brutal war of attrition. So how did this happen? Why are fishing nets suddenly as important as tanks, artillery, and missiles? And what does this strange story tell us about the future of warfare? And about the deep, hidden connections between climate change, waste, and global conflict? Let's break it down. It's late July, 2025. Russia's summer offensive is in full swing across the eastern front, stretching over 1,000 kilometers. But the fiercest fighting is concentrated in western Donetsk. Here, Russian forces push relentlessly toward encircling Ukraine's last major urban strongholds: Pokrovsk, Lyman, Seversk, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and especially Kostiantynivka. If those cities fall, Russia would claim full control over Donetsk, a symbolic and strategic victory it has sought since annexing the region back in 2022. Outnumbered and outgunned, Ukraine's defenders hold the line with grit and determination. But the biggest challenge isn't just Russian artillery or manpower, it's drones. The skies above Donetsk hum constantly with the sound of drones. Small quadcopters, loitering munitions, kamikaze FPVs. Both sides use them, but Russia has the edge. Why? Because of one chilling innovation: fiber-optic guided FPV drones. Instead of relying on GPS signals, which Ukraine's advanced electronic warfare systems can jam, these drones are tethered by kilometers of fiber-optic cable to their operators. That makes them almost impossible to disrupt. They dive, swoop, and strike with deadly precision, even in areas saturated with jamming, and they are changing the game. For Ukrainian soldiers, moving supplies, ammunition, or reinforcements has become a nightmare. Roads and supply lines are constantly watched. Every vehicle, every squad that moves risks being spotted and struck. To adapt, Ukraine relies heavily on its own drones for resupply. At dawn and dusk, large quadcopters, nicknamed vampires, carry 10 kilograms of food, batteries, and ammunition over enemy lines. But even these flights are risky. As one frontline commander told CNN, mortar teams often end up hiking for hours under drone-infested skies, carrying 30 kilograms of shells on their backs. So how do you fight back against this new wave of Russian drone warfare? Ukrainian troops have tried everything: shotguns, machine guns, their own FPV drones, even running out with scissors to cut the cables dangling behind Russian drones. But those desperate measures aren't enough. That's when they rediscovered something surprisingly effective: fishing nets. Stretch a sturdy nylon net across a road or a supply corridor, and suddenly, drones can't dive straight into their targets. They hit the mesh and either detonate prematurely, harmlessly above the soldiers they were meant to kill, or get tangled, spinning helplessly like flies in a spider web. Quadcopters in particular are easily trapped, and sometimes they're even captured intact, giving Ukraine valuable hardware to study or reuse.
One Ukrainian guardsman, Mikhailo Ardashin, explained it simply: even after an explosion, the net doesn't burn completely. The fibers still catch other drones.
It sounds almost laughable. 21st century drone warfare being foiled by fishing gear. But it works. Of course, nothing in war is foolproof. Russian pilots have adapted by dropping glide bombs on roads covered with nets, blowing holes that their drones can slip through. Sometimes locals cut gaps in the nets just to cross roads more easily, unwittingly creating vulnerabilities. Russian operators exploit those holes to guide drones under the mesh. In Kostiantynivka, it has become a cat-and-mouse game. Nets go up, bombs fall, holes appear, drones slip through, and nets are patched again. What's ironic is that Russia actually pioneered this tactic. Back in 2023, near Bakhmut, Russian engineers experimented with draping nets over supply routes. By 2024, during Ukraine's raid into Kursk, Nets proved vital for Russia's ability to move troops and equipment without being shredded by Ukrainian drones. By summer 2025, nearly every Russian supply road around Bakhmut was covered with nets, and Moscow even announced that thousands of North Korean engineers would help install more. Ukraine, desperate to keep its own logistics alive, has now adopted the very same tactic. And this brings us to a critical question. Where do all these nets come from? Russia has an answer. Its fishing industry. Despite sanctions, it still produces nets domestically and imports huge volumes from China. Ukraine has no such luxury. With no major fishing net industry of its own and no access to Chinese exports, it has to get creative. And here's where the story takes an unexpected environmental twist. Because fishing nets aren't just military assets. They're also one of the most damaging forms of ocean pollution on Earth. Every year, thousands of tons of nets are lost or abandoned at sea, turning into so-called ghost nets. These deadly webs drift silently, snaring fish, turtles, dolphins, and seabirds for decades. Scientists estimate that nearly 6% of all nets and almost 30% of all fishing lines used globally end up discarded. In fact, nearly half of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the swirling island of plastic the size of France, is made of abandoned fishing gear. Governments and NGOs have spent years trying to recycle or eliminate them. But recycling is expensive, and most nets have a short life, barely a year before they're replaced. As a result, mountains of unwanted nets pile up in ports and landfills. For Ukraine, that waste has become a lifeline. Take Denmark. After Brexit, many Danish fishermen lost access to British waters. They had warehouses full of unused heavy trawl nets. Strong, durable, exactly what Ukraine needed. In one tiny fishing town of just 2,000 people, Thyborøn, more than 450 tons of thick nylon nets sat rotting in storage. Enter Karl Futrup, a 53-year-old gardener from Copenhagen. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat, just an ordinary man who had followed the war closely and wanted to help. When Ukrainian troops reached out asking for nets, Karl started messaging Danish fishermen on Facebook. To his surprise, many said yes. They couldn't sell the nets, they couldn't recycle them, but they could donate them. By March 2025, over 400 tons of nets from Thyborøn alone were already in Ukraine, strung over trenches and roads, swatting Russian drones out of the sky like mosquitoes. More shipments are on the way, possibly over 1 million kilograms in total. But there's a catch. Transport. Each truckload of 20 tons costs about $3,200 to move from Denmark to Ukraine. Dozens of trips are required. The nets may be free, but logistics aren't. NGOs like Operation Change are stepping in to fundraise, coordinate, and deliver the nets, yet the demand is massive. A single Ukrainian battalion might need 60 tons of nets every month just to keep its supply lines covered. Multiply that across dozens of brigades, and you start to see the scale of the challenge. That's why Ukraine is now appealing not just to Denmark, but to Sweden, France, Spain, any European country with warehouses or landfills full of old nets. Instead of burning or burying them, why not send them to the front lines? They're cheap, effective, and ironically eco-friendly when repurposed this way. And this is where the story becomes bigger than just nets. Because what's happening in Ukraine reflects a deeper truth about modern war. Expensive high-tech weapons are constantly being challenged and sometimes defeated by simple, low-cost improvisations. Think about it. Russia spends millions on fiber-optic drones. Ukraine counters with trash nets worth pennies. Russia welds cope cages on its tanks, mocked at first but sometimes effective. Ukraine, in turn, mounts steel cages, uses decoy heat sources, even attaches mannequins to vehicles to fool Russian operators. Each move is met with a counter-move, often cobbled together from the cheapest, most unexpected materials. It's David versus Goliath, played out over and over again. And often David's slingshot isn't a missile, it's a fishing net. But here's what the mainstream media rarely tells you. This strange convergence of waste, war, and survival highlights the fragility of our world. The same globalized systems that produce mountains of plastic pollution also fuel arms races and geopolitical rivalries. Fishing nets discarded in Europe become tools of resistance in Ukraine. Weapons built in Russia are guided by cables likely produced in Asia. North Korean engineers work thousands of miles from home to keep Russian supply lines safe. Everything is connected. And that raises a sobering question. If simple fishing nets can reshape the battlefield in Ukraine, what other low-tech tools could disrupt tomorrow's wars? Could old tires, scrap metal, or even e-waste become the building blocks of future defenses? This war has already shown us that innovation doesn't always come from billion-dollar weapons labs. Sometimes it comes from a fisherman's warehouse or from an ordinary gardener in Copenhagen scrolling through Facebook. So next time you hear a news anchor talk about hypersonic missiles or AI-guided drones, remember this. Somewhere in Ukraine, a soldier's life may be saved not by cutting-edge tech, but by a ragged piece of nylon that once drifted in the ocean. In the end, the fishing net story is more than just a curiosity. It's a symbol of resilience, of improvisation, and of how the smallest things can alter the course of the biggest events. For Russia, the widespread use of nets is a problem that complicates its offensive. For Ukraine, it's a lifeline that keeps supplies moving and soldiers alive. For the rest of us, it's a reminder that the boundaries between war, waste, and everyday life are thinner than we think. So what do you think? Could fishing nets, one of humanity's oldest tools, really become a decisive weapon in 21st century warfare? And what other low-tech solutions do you think could reshape the battlefield? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Because in this war, and in the world beyond it, the stories that matter most are often the ones hiding in plain sight.